Think about this for a second. You actually lived an entire life for your first 3 years. You took your very first steps, you spoke your first words, you tasted real food for the first time, felt the rain on your skin, and experienced this whole world of incredible firsts. And yet, you remember absolutely none of it. For you, it's just a complete, absolute blank. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to search your own mind for a second. Think about your absolute earliest memory. It's probably a bit blurry, right? Kind of fragmented. Now, most people naturally assume the answer to this missing time is pretty simple. We usually just think, well, a baby's brain just wasn't ready to record anything yet. We assume the hardware was simply too weak. But actually, scratch that. We are completely wrong. Way back in 1905, Sigmund Freud became the very first person to actually put a name to this giant blank space in our lives. He called it infantile amnesia. And I've got to tell you, the real reason for this amnesia is far, far stranger than just a simple failure of your brain to hit the record button. See, your brain was recording everything. The memories were definitely there, but something inside your head was actively destroying them. To prove this, let's look at this incredibly elegant experiment from the 1980s. Psychologist Carolyn Rovi Collier took a ribbon and tied it from a baby's ankle to a crib mobile. The babies, they quickly learned cause and effect. Kicking meant movements, and when they were brought back days later, the babies immediately started kicking again. This proved definitively that infant brains absolutely can learn, store, and effortlessly recall information. Just look at these retention times. They're wild. 2-month-old babies held on to that memory for a couple of days. 6-month-old babies, they remembered for weeks. So babies definitely form memories. They have the data securely saved. But, this vastly deepens our mystery. Because if they can remember, why is every single trace of this time completely gone by the time we hit adulthood? Well, the first piece of the puzzle is actually a structural flaw. So in adults, the hippocampus works with the prefrontal cortex to firmly tag and store our experiences. But in infants, that physical wiring simply isn't built yet. There's this key region called the dentate gyrus, and it acts as the gateway for new memories. But until you're right around 2 to 4 years old, this gateway is basically still under construction. Short-term memories absolutely form in babies, but the bridge needed to move them over into permanent long-term storage just isn't ready for traffic yet. Which brings us to Section 1, the inside job, neurogenesis. So in 2014, neuroscientists Sheena Josselin and Paul Franklin introduced a hypothesis that totally flipped how we think about infant memory. They were looking at neurogenesis. Basically, this is the explosive, rapid production of brand new neurons in your hippocampus during those first few years. Now, these new cells are absolutely crucial. They wire up vital circuits you'll use for the rest of your life. But this rapid construction, it comes with a massive cost. Because think about it, building new rooms usually means tearing down old walls. Through some really clever mouse experiments, these scientists proved a deeply counterintuitive fact. Literally every time a new neuron integrates into a circuit, it actively overwrites the existing connections. That explosion of new neurons was quite literally overwriting your early memories. This is just a massive shift in how we understand our own minds. Your earliest experiences weren't lost because they were never saved. They were destroyed. Your brain was constantly aggressively remodeling itself. So your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold memories. No, it was simply too busy growing to keep them intact. All right, let's move on to Section 2, the missing protagonist, autobiographical memory. So developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage realized something pretty profound. To have a memory where you are the main character, well, you must first have a you. And we see this super clearly in the classic mirror rouge test. You put a little dot of rouge on a baby's nose and place them in front of a mirror. Before about 18 months of age, they reach for the mirror, totally thinking it's another child. But after 18 months, they reach for their own face. They finally truly recognize themselves. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this timeline of self-recognition perfectly matches the earliest age autobiographical memories can even form. Before roughly 18 months, you literally had no internal narrator. There was no overarching concept of self inside your head to package all your lived experiences into a cohesive, flowing story. Which, poses a slightly uncomfortable question. If your mind was literally disassembled and rebuilt neuron by neuron, and you had absolutely no continuous sense of self, is that baby in your old photos actually you? Or is it someone else entirely, someone who simply lived in the exact same body before, kind of handing it over to the person you are today? And that leads us to Section 3, the missing blueprint, language. Developmental psychologist Katherine Yelson discovered the final piece of this incredible puzzle. See, raw sensory impressions desperately need structure to survive the test of time, and that structure is language. Words literally containerize the experience. Without them, those raw memories exist for a brief moment, and then they just spill away like water with no container. But once children start speaking, and especially once they start having narrative conversations with adults about past events, their ability to form lasting memories just skyrockets. And guys, this isn't just theory. The culture you grow up in literally shapes the timeline of your own mind. Just look at these averages across different cultures. In the Maori culture of New Zealand, which has a fierce oral tradition, their earliest memories reach all the way back to 2.5 years old. In Western cultures, where we have a lot of parent storytelling, it's about 3.5 years. And in some East Asian cultures, where narratives focus a bit less on the individual, it's closer to 4. Language and cultural storytelling literally build the blueprint of your memory. So the crucial point is this. Your infantile amnesia wasn't caused by just one isolated thing. It was everything all at once. Your hippocampus just wasn't fully wired yet to bridge the gap to long-term storage. The violent storm of neurogenesis was actively overriding your old memory circuits. You possessed no true sense of self to anchor your story, and you had no language to containerize the experience. It was this massive, simultaneous neurological and psychological transformation. Now, if you ever feel a sense of loss for those missing years, I want you to remember this. You are definitely not alone. Every single human being who has ever lived went through this exact same fiery crucible. Literally every person you've ever met shares this exact same neurological void. We all have a black hole right where the first years of our life should be. But the reason for this void is not a failure of your mind. Honestly, it's a triumph of your development. Your brain was doing something far, far more important than remembering those early days. It was becoming you. And creating the person you are today required, quite literally, destroying the person who came before. I'm going to leave you to think about that profound reality for a bit, and I will see you in the next explainer.